For more than a decade, India's most influential news channel has built its unimpeachable reputation by keeping an unflagging vigil on every now moment of our times. 24 hours a day, Times Now serves as a perfect foil for India's diversity, a kaleidoscope of images and a cornucopia of views. As the day dawns, so does the common man on his favorite platform, Times Now. Times Now's vow to fight for the rights of the common man has led us to devise change-inducing campaigns, never failing to fight fear in the face of adversity with the power of the fact. To ensure our viewers were fully aware of the gravity of the once-in-a-century pandemic, Times Now unfurled the one-of-its-kind India Outbreak Report. When the COVID ghost of gloom haunted India, your channel, Times Now, shed light on the road to revival. Like the ever-blazing, life-giving sun, without fail, without exception, you will find Times Now's intrepid teams first on the horizon of the big national news story. While others resort to malpractice and drive a personal agenda, Times Now has never compromised on its credibility. Unwaveringly, unafraid, unflinchingly, honest, always. Just like India's democracy that empowers the last citizen, your channel has pledged to give voice to the most marginalized. Times Now's aggressive reporting style has made it the relentless force it is today, because your channel's only motivation is the people's conviction. Unblemished, uncompromised, unrelenting, unbiased, unintimidatable, unsurpassed. We are Times Now.
The actual action begins here.
Good evening, everyone. OFT presents Pragyan 21, powered by Autodesk, co-sponsored by Times Now, is back with a panel discussion, Crossfire 21. We would like to thank our English Journal's partner, Free Press Journal, our online news partner, News Karnataka, and the Statesman, our online media partner, the Campus Media, and our Kannada news partner, Vrata Bharti, for their individual assistance. Charles Mackay once said, "Any fool can have facts, but having an opinion is an art." However, for our times, the quote may be modified as, "Any fool can have opinions, having an informed discussion about them is an art." On that note, we would welcome you to Crossfire 21, organized by Pragyan, the Techno-Managerial Fest of NIT Trichy.
Social media is a boon for networking, but there are more than frequent cases of cyberbullying and intellectual imbalance. These negatives concern the tech-savvy generation of ours. Social media is a self-sustained and AI-driven metaverse where opinions are created and destroyed, profits can boom or diminish, and reputations built or tarnished, all in a matter of seconds. Allegations have been made, conspiracy theories have been floated, yet we are still in the dark about future implications of social media, whether its benefits really outweigh its disadvantages, and whether one is the user or is actually being used.
This is the rationale behind the topic of Crossfire 21. Social media has it morphed into social dilemma. And without any further ado, let me introduce the panelists. We have with us Mr. John C. Hivens, Executive Director of IEEE Global Initiative on AI Ethics, Mr. Frank Roshan Pereira, Editor-in-Chief, Bharat First, and ex-anchor RSTV.
Dr. Shankar Pravesh, Assistant Professor at IIT Kanpur with research interests in the fields of social media, agent-based simulation, and fairness in big data. We welcome you, sir. Dr. Santosh Kumar Chaturvedi, Fellow of Royal College of Psychiatry UK, Consultant Psychiatrist, and former Dean of NIMHANS, Bangalore. We welcome you, sir. And we regret to inform that Mr. Arnav Neil Ghosh will not join us today due to unavoidable circumstances. And finally, the moderator for today's Crossfire, the Assistant Editor of Technology at HT Mint, Mr. Prasid Banerjee. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shriyodaya. Thank you. This panel, we have said that social media is a modern dilemma, so to speak. But let me just start off the panel by saying that social media today is the internet. It's no longer just about saying we go to this platform or that platform. So let's start off with just the original question that what is social media today? Why do we use it? Given that Facebook and all companies are now involved in internet exchange points and things like that, right? So why do we use social media? What is the use of social media? What are people gaining from it? Let me start with Mr. Havens here. If you have any thoughts on this.
Well, sure. First of all, just want to say thank you again. It's an honor to be part of this panel with my esteemed colleagues and at the event. So thank you very much. I think when I first started working in social media, I just realized I've been on Twitter for 14 years. 14 years ago, it was very easy to say, here's traditional media, newspapers, TV, radio, and then here's this new stuff. In fact, we used to call it new media, Twitter and Facebook. Initially, it was this excitement of here are so many people who don't normally have a voice, like that wonderful video you showed to open up our panel. Anyone now can speak. Now, I should say in general, and I'm based in the US, where by and large, if you post something on Twitter or Facebook, you may not necessarily risk, say, going to jail or what have you. So I want to be sensitive to different global regions. But in general, this logic of there's a message coming from a larger entity, a government or media outlet. And in the past, it used to be very hard for an individual to have a voice. 14 years ago, that all changed in a very, I think, positive way, at least in terms of the messaging. Someone could have a message about the government or business, or just, they like dogs and they start talking about dogs and they start to build a brand or a voice because of these channels. So from a positive perspective, that's one thing I'll start with, and I have other thoughts, but I want to keep my answers short.
Thanks a lot for that. Frank, if I could bring you in here, what are your thoughts on what social media has become today? You and I are both journalists. We've seen social media in a certain way. What are your thoughts on what social media has become today?
If I could just take off from where John, left, just have a sip of water, please. It's interesting because strangely, even I started my Twitter account way back in 2009. And when I started my Twitter account in 2009, I didn't see the kind of traction that I see today. It's really amazing how social media has grown over the years. I think those were the days of Facebook and Orkut. I think Orkut is no longer exists. But, we could only upload 12 photos and not more than that. And we were thrilled with that. And seeing how social media has transformed and moved from there to what it is now, it's amazing. I mean, the way this transformational change has taken place has also ensured that, the public at large has gotten a lot more closer to their heroes, to some star figures. They know what's happening with the lives of people that they look up to. So that is one change that we've seen. That is one change that we've noticed. As far as our industry is concerned, Prasid, since we are talking about how we are journalists, the way news is disseminated also has changed. How it was done in, say, 10 years ago to how it is being done now is very, very different. And you've seen a lot of new media houses flourish just based on what they see on social media and the kind of information they take from social media, mainly Twitter and Facebook and some of these platforms. It has also given the youth a lot more courage to come forward and do things on their own. The youth of today is very different from what we have been through over the last, say, 30, 40 years. They are a lot more aspirational. They want their voices to be heard. They want everything instantly. We want instant noodles, we want instant internet, and we want instant everything else. So in such a scenario, social media seems like it's tailor-made for them. This generation is born with social media. We, Prasid, I guess, are part of a generation where we are in between, where we are neither born with it, but we are still accustomed to it. And then our parents probably belong to another generation which finds it very difficult to use social media and to be on social media. So that's where the challenge really lies. But nonetheless, social media has given us a lot of opportunities, and social media has grown the way it has grown over the last decade or so. It's because people want it. People want more of it, and this is what the people believe that they need. And that's why we've seen it grow the way we've seen it grow as well. If there was no demand for it, the growth wouldn't have been this phenomenal. I'd like to stop here.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the aspect of, generations and how different generations have used it. Dr. Chaturvedi, this is where I think the neuroscience behind how people use social media may also have changed. Like for me, I started with High Five, a platform that people don't even remember. And, the way High Five helped me was I learned a lot of coding because of how I used to make my High Five profile. But today, people use social media for different purposes. I wanted to talk to you about the neuroscience behind this. How do people look at themselves on social media? How do they use it based on that? Sorry sir, you're on mute.
Thank you. Proceed. First thing we must remember is man is a social animal. Like unlike all other animals, we are I mean, probably dog is the next one, but man is otherwise a social animal. When, as a mental health professional, what we look at is the social development of a person. And the earliest is in the first few months after a child's birth, when there is a social smile, when the child sees the mother or child sees somebody whom they know. And then from then on, it comes up when they go to school, then there is, social interactions, social connections. So social activity is a very important part. And that is where, I mean, the type of media has also changed, as Frank was saying, and you were saying, you were probably referring to me as generation of your parents, and we had a different type of media. We had circus, we had the in the street, a guy will bring a monkey or a bear in the streets, and they will do a show and they will pass on a message. And that is how I remember in the 60s, when the elections, when BJP was not BJP, it was Jan Sangh and Congress, both were at their peaks, and how they used to, come in the streets and do plays and songs and various. So that was their way of interacting with the society and conversing and advertising about what they were doing. So social media is just another different form of a media. In the beginnings, somebody talked about cyberbullying, but bullying has always been there. Now, what I would like to say is that we still don't have enough research to say that bullying is more harmful or cyberbullying is more harmful. That type of a media, it had more impact, or this type of media has a more impact. And this is not the end. The way, the 5G and God knows what else will happen, the things are going to move. People might, I feel, be able to enter our dreams or our unconscious in due course of time and be able to influence us through the neuroscience. So we really don't know. We are not, and even considering that this is the end. So it will move on. New generations will come, new methods will come. So new problems have come, and different aspects of it. From a statistical point of view, I always feel that everything is like a bell-shaped curve. So we most of the things are in the middle, 2/3. Then there are some which are very good about it, and some things which are very bad about it, and that will be there for everything. I mean, I might sound a cynic, but that's how it is going to be. Thank you.
And to that point, Dr. Pravesh, like Dr. Chaturvedi said, there hasn't been enough research in a lot of things, but social media has evolved, and a lot of the research on social media depends on how the technology behind all of this has evolved. And I understand that's where you specialize in the field of social media and agent based simulation. Just from a technological point of view, what is social media today as compared to, let's say, 2004 when Facebook started, or even before that, let's say Orkut or whatever?
So we can view it as that it has transformed our social life. So then we have to define what we mean by our social life. So it is the way we connect to our friends, it is the way we live our daily life, the way the government runs our society, the way businesses try to attract consumer. So every aspect of our social life that we can think of, because social media can be seen as a presence, can be defined in presence of social network. So anything that is part of a network uh, has been transformed by the presence of social media. So if we, let's say for example, if we talk in terms of businesses, they want to target individual customers who could be a better potential customer for their products, or they can generate higher click-through rates or advertising revenue, revenue per advertising cost. In terms of policy, if we see, the, now our governments, even our police, is interested in tracking or using the kind of conversation that goes on, and if that could be useful in identifying um, potential criminals. But it also has negative side effects. For example, one of the one of the major objectives of all big technologies have been to improve their system, and that requires some sort of learning, either machine learning or artificial intelligence. And we have to give these models a set of features, and sometimes the features that we give them to learn these models are highly sensitive. For example, I want to judge hire a potential uh, candidate for my company. I search the profile and identify her various demographics profile based on LinkedIn or Facebook, and that update the system. So what we have seen and again, either in business hiring process or in policing, that one particular community or groups are always become marginalized due to this learning process. So we have to be aware about that. How to solve that, maybe that we can discuss uh, with other panel members, that what could be the possible way to deal with that problem.
Got it. So what you're saying is that there's a lot of data that is being generated out of this, and like Dr. Chaturvedi said, that man is a social animal. But for the longest time, we used to speak in closed groups, and we never wondered what would happen with all of these things that we're saying. Telling your friend that you like a particular brand of milk did not mean that that brand of milk now knows about it. So there is a lot of data tracking happening, and it seems like a lot of people, I mean, that is where a lot of the sort of the dilemma part of social media comes in, that what is this data tracking doing? But I sometimes feel that maybe we're also taking it out of proportion, right? So Mr. Havens, do you think that are we taking it out of proportion, or are we absolutely reacting to it the way we should be?
Well, I think what's really challenging is, as an example, if I tell all of you I'm trustworthy, hey, gentlemen, I'm trustworthy. What does that even mean? And Dr. Santosh, I'm really intrigued by all you're saying and your work in general. My dad was a psychiatrist, as I mentioned to you in an email, and I think we have to recognize that where a person is not giving agency and disclosure, then any tracking that happens, in one sense, is almost immaterial, right? Meaning the way that the economic underpinnings of all tracking works is it is by definition invisible. It's algorithmic. It's also invisible in the sense of a lot of people just don't care. Now, I'm coming from the US, so I'm speaking largely from a US perspective. But if it's the same, I'm assuming in many parts of India or around the world, you go to a website, it used to be GDPR. Now there's new cookies, and people are like, whatever, I just want to get on Amazon or buy a book, and they click a button. That whole process, if they don't really understand that their data is universally being tracked and used by other people for purposes that mainly are about getting people to buy things, then in terms of the opportunities that we have to reshift our thinking, that's the dilemma that I'm so glad that you're bringing up. The dilemma for me is not as much about bad actors doing whatever. It's a recognition that unless we all are given tools tied to identity, and by the way, India, of course, with Aadhaar, I think still leads the world with aspects of identity, knowing there were issues with implementations of Aadhaar, but what was it, 2.4 billion people? I mean, of course there's going to be issues. But the point is that if everyone here knows I'm John, and that's the identity proof, like say through a passport or something. So when you see something that posts and says John Havens, the first step of me even establishing trust is for all of you, if you care, that is the real John Havens. The second step, we aren't there yet, because we don't have either blockchain or I'll use the term sovereign tools. That term sovereign can be very difficult. The English word, sometimes when it's translated, obviously it has political ramifications. But I'm just going to say ways that when I send a message to Dr. Santosh, he knows this is John because of like a blockchain ledger, trustworthy makeup. I can trust, I'm using air quotes too much, but I can assume that this is John and whatever he's sent to me are his actual words. Then and only then, and by the way, I say this respectfully to Dr. Santosh, who is the leader in this, that's when a person can start saying for themselves, do I trust what this person is saying? Because trust is only built up once people actually know they're interacting with one another or with a brand or with the government. So I say that because a lot of the work that I'm driving at IEEE and all the work that I drive is open, free for anyone to join. So I am pitching a little bit, but it's all an invitation because we work on consensus. And the logic here is to say that until every human, it's very aspirational, but it's critical, right? Right now, every human is being tracked, period. I don't need to know if in India everyone's on Facebook or whatever social channel. And I have friends all the time who are like, well, I'm out on Facebook. Doesn't make a difference. Someone took your picture at a picnic. You were being tracked via GPS. These things will remain negative outside of what governments or businesses want to do because there has not been participatory channels, technologies, and policies prioritizing humans to have equal parity, equal ways to communicate back through trusted channels like blockchain to say, look, you're tracking me from the outside in. Great. I want to go on Amazon and only buy certain types of books. That's where the technology is fantastic. However, the economic underpinnings mean that our data is largely being sold or transferred in ways that we don't know about. So unless we have, it's not just protections, it's the ability for every human to still have agency, the ability to speak back into this whole realm. And then the knowledge that when I send a message as John, that trusted blockchain-like ledger structure means that then when I hear back from Dr. Santosh, genuine relationships can form like we used to have only in the quote real world. So the dilemma is a wonderful opportunity, but it's also one that we really have to say, and I'll talk more about this later. What's the definition of success for social media? What's the definition of success for AI? And if we have time, I'll give you my thoughts on that later.
Dr. Santosh, I'll just quickly jump in here. We would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, thank you, John. But I hope I would believe that you trust me if you drop the doctor before my name. Just call me Santosh. Then we can trust each other. Yeah. I have a 2 points, just brief points to make. Unlike the US, in India, there is a cultural difference. We are an open society. We talk loudly in the streets. We shout from one house to another and call out people. And everybody wants everybody to know everything. So suddenly, this issue of privacy has come when social media has come. So before that, it was not there. It was there only for political things and things like those. Another thing is, but I agree with you that this, people don't want to be known to others whom they don't want to know. So my one of my theories is that as time goes by, intelligence quotient will be replaced by vigilance quotient. you know the more paranoid you are, the more likely you are likely to survive. You need to be paranoid because there is somebody watching you. And of course they are watching you, and at present I don't know how many thousands of people are watching us. So there's somebody watching you, somebody listening to you, somebody following you through the GPS. They are seeing what. So we need to be paranoid, and the more paranoid we are, it will be the survival of the most paranoid, survival of the person. That person would be the fittest. But the whole personality dimensions for a mental health professional, and your dad has been a psychiatrist, so you must be having some good idea about it. We used to see personalities, whether a person is able to trust another person. If they are not, then they are paranoid. Those who are shy, inhibited, those who are extrovert, those who are introvert, those who are histrionic. There are different types of personalities. So for medical professionals and mental health professionals like me, it's becoming very difficult. I have tried my team to look at assessing personality based on social media. What is the status level people write, what is it they write more common, what is it that they read. So the whole concept of personality will change. And as you know, we heard a little time back about artificial intelligence and machine learning. The whole concept of personality and behavior is going to change. So thank you very much.
Great. Frank, if you could jump in, I'm sure you would have thoughts on this because what Dr. Santosh said, you will deal with on a regular basis when you're, reporting on all of these subjects, or rather covering all of these subjects. So what would your thoughts be on this? Frank, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I've been making points actually while all of you all have been speaking, quietly noting down, what you all have been talking about. There are some things that I agree with, some things that I don't agree with. Let me start with what Dr. Chaturvedi said about, how only those who are paranoid, only those who are really worried and concerned about their data and their privacy are the ones who may survive at the end. So I don't think so, because I live my life on social media. I live life with an open book. I am what I am for you, for millions of people out there, and for everybody else. I don't have anything to hide, so I'm not paranoid. So there is one set of people who come, or there's that one school of thought, and there is nothing that concerns me as far as social media is concerned. Should you be concerned? Should you be worried as far as your privacy and other aspects that have been legitimately raised by several of the other panelists here? Yes. Let me just give you a spooky example and go beyond what John just said. He spoke about how when you click on Amazon, you immediately get something in your email, or you get something somewhere else. Let me give you an example of something that happened a few months ago. My wife and I were talking about, in our living room, phones away, no devices anywhere close to us. We were talking about getting a potential bride for someone that we know. All right. And within a span of 2 hours, I get a call on my phone, someone asking me if I am looking for a bride for someone in my house, not even me. Okay, so that is the level of level of tracking that is taking place. So that was really spooky. It started, of course, a few years ago when I booked a flight ticket, and while I was heading to the airport, I get a notification from Gmail saying your flight is in 3 hours. So, that is, these are aspects when you don't even link your account to Gmail, when you don't even put up your ticket or any of those aspects there, you immediately get these notifications. So this is the level of snooping that is taking place. But like I said again, when I don't have anything to hide, I know this is happening. How do I stop it? I don't know. I'm not a technocrat. I know that this can only be stopped with the use of technology, and if someone seriously wants to do something about it. But who actually seriously wants to do anything about this? Because at the end of the day, it comes down to money, it comes down to big tech, it comes down to big businesses, and governments somewhere are also involved at some level. So who's going to bell the cat? That is another aspect that we need to look at. Also, there's another aspect that the social media platforms always talk about. They say that everything is mentioned in the terms and conditions, so you know what you're getting into. I'm sorry, but I don't know what I'm getting into, because these things run into hundreds of pages and I don't understand the terminology. The kind of terms that I use there is something that someone who is a graduate or a postgraduate cannot understand. So how can you expect the masses who have never been to school or who don't know how to legitimately read, understand these terms and technologies? John, 1.4 billion people. That's the number. That's the number of people that we have here in India. And how do you expect them to understand these terms and these technical aspects? So I don't know. I'm sorry, people don't know what they're getting into. So unless someone takes it seriously and actually does something about it, someone who has the power to do something about it, I'm afraid this is not going to change. This is something that is going to continue. So I see the better way out. I don't care if someone is listening. What the hell are they going to do with that information? That's how I would look at it. Over to you, Prasid.
Great, but that's also so the central question in all of this is that algorithms at the end of the day are black holes, right? Nobody understands how an algorithm works. For what it's worth, the coder who writes an artificial intelligence algorithm will not understand his own algorithm after it has been put into practice after a while, right? So, Dr. Pravesh, how do you bring fairness into this entire concept? How do we define fairness in all of this? You're on mute, Dr. Pravesh.
Yeah, sorry. I believe to address this problem, we have to approach all stakeholders of this process, right? So, for example, we have to make the stakeholders some way part of the decision making process. That could be one way. Another way that is it is also related to a lot of research in academia, that replication of a lot of academic research is not possible, and it is a kind of related problem. What's going on here is that we have to make the data and the code, to the extent possible, if it is a government money, publicly available or open source it, so that people can audit it, or they have knowledge what kind of data is being collected. For private parties, we have limited control, but we have to make them accountable, that they adhere to the overall constitutional structure wherever they are operating, and definitely some sort of algorithmic audit would help us to tackle this problem.
I think Mr. Havens, that gives us a great idea, a chance to talk about what the metrics for success for AI and social media should be. And I know you want to talk about this, so please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm not sure if Frank is still here, but I loved his comments, and I just wanted to say something quick to that. I've for 14 years I've been on Twitter, so a lot of my life or privacy I've been either giving up or I'm comfortable with that. The thing I mentioned about data access, are we able to access all of our data, right? So there's how a person likes to share information about themselves. That's part A. Part B is saying, how would I get access to the data that I've shared? Now, in one sense, I could either take copies of every tweet I've ever sent. I could see in GPS what I've done, right? And you can understand how quickly that would be exhausting. Or there would be ways that I would have access to data that I am the only person that can generate that data on the planet. Whether or not people care, I'm the only John. So that unique data trail, right? What I wanted to do as a yes and to what Frank said is what our preferences are, that's one thing. Our access to the data that we've created involves key ideas of intellectual property, right? If my data is being accessed and sold or accessed and used for marketing purposes, and there's money being made, it's a very fair question to say, how should I be compensated? Now, I'm not a person that says people should sell their data. That can be equivalent to selling human organs, right? You shouldn't sell those things. But the other thing I'll mention too is Frank's, oftentimes I like the question, what do I have to hide? I think it's a good starter question. I'm just speaking for myself. And the answer is, I have a lot to hide. For one thing, my medical data. I don't need to share my medical data with people. By the way, if Frank were here, this is all yes and. I'm agreeing with Frank. Also, things like what we tend to not always think about, one point of data, hey, I'm really in the mood for a cup of coffee right now, right? I'm thinking, who cares? But combined with my location data, combined with a wristband that measures my galvanic skin temperature that equates to nervousness. Maybe I want coffee because I'm nervous at a specific place and a specific time. Those points of data start to create what could be, and I defer to Dr. Santosh here again, almost a pattern of who I am psychiatrically. That type of data is being sold, has been sold on lists from data brokers saying nervous people who are more likely to want certain foods or certain drugs. And then Frank's story about being contacted as he was, it is a given. It is almost a decade-old business that we are all being targeted to buy certain things at certain times. This does not have to be, quote, evil. This is not necessarily wrong. How it remains opaque, though, means that there's something happening. People don't want to change the economic systems that would let us have access to our data. And I would call that wrong. Or we are not being taught. And I'll use this phrase and then I'll go to the question about metrics of success. The question is, what do I have to hide is one question. Oh, and there's Frank. I was just saying, Frank, how much I like your comments. The other
I'm so sorry.
No, I'm praising you, so I wanted you to be here. The other thing I wanted to say, the question, and this is from my dad too, from a psychiatrist, what is ours to reveal, right? For instance, what about our young people anywhere in the world who may be gay, right? Do we want them to go to school and have someone say, hey, I have an app that says because of your behavior and who you're talking with and what you say, there's an 80% chance you're gay. Are you gay? Is that something that is someone else's decision to announce to the world? No. Our faith, a person is Islam, Jewish, Christian, agnostic, whatever it is, do they get to announce to the world, I am this? Or do we wait for these social channels, or more importantly, the tools underneath them that don't give us access to our data, that don't prioritize agency, that don't encourage people to know, and I'm saying this now, all of us on the phone, anyone listening, your data is the most precious part of who you are. Even if you think it's not, even if you're thinking, and by the way, Frank, I'm saying this as a yes and, right? Even as we think, who cares? I'm sharing this. That one bit of data is not data in isolation. It is one piece of who you are. And that data mixed with GPS and timestamp means all these things can be assumed about you, acted upon. and used to either manipulate, or when we are invited to participate through these agency channels I'm talking about, then they can glorify and amplify. And by the way, they can say to someone, Frank, oh, you're a public sharing person. Well, I'm a brand using blockchain or whatever. Do you want these offers? But it's night and day different than what is here now. It's very different than you sitting in your living room going, how did someone know about my wife and my conversation? That's very different than the next time you turn on your computer or you get a text or whatever on whatever channel that you have opted into saying, hey, because of these things that you know about, it seems like you might be interested in X. Are you? That's when I assume, I don't want to speak for you, Frank, but then trust is like, wow, now I really would like help with this. Thanks so much. Anyway, long answer, but I just love what you said, Frank. The metrics of success, ultimately, for me, and a lot of the work we're leading at IEEE, boil down to what's called a triple bottom line mindset, which is people, planet, and profit. Right now in the world in general, through GDP, gross domestic product, that's the ultimate measure for the past 70 years globally in India and the States. That one number is what a country can say, well, our GDP is X, your GDP is Y. And right away, everyone feels bad. Oh, our GDP is less. At an individual level, that means I make more or less money. I am more or less productive. And socially, it makes me feel bad. And one of the first things, at least in the States, I've compared for years, what's your salary? Not, are you a good dad? Have you had time in nature today? Do your kids love you? How do you know? And people say, well, these things, they're squishy. You can't measure them. And Dr. Santosh knows, of course you can. The World Health Organization, Gallup, the American Psychiatric Association, you can actually objectively and subjectively, with massive data sets, using these wonderful AI tools, you can measure children's well-being. New Zealand is doing it in their economy. And so measuring metrics of success should be, right, not just, right, here's what we have to have: trusted channels of news, trusted ways to access and have portability or to share our data, right? Ways that we can all establish trust that can also be somewhat universal, right? Meaning America and India, et cetera. But then the question is, what if that all happens? What if it's 5 years from now and we have transparency and a lack of bias? What then? Well, ultimately, don't we need, not just want, our environment, our beautiful planet, not just to not be harmed. We're beyond not harming our planet. You can't build a product and say, well, the emissions only do X. That won't save the planet. We have to have sustainable business plans, infrastructure plans that say, as I design something, an AI tool, a news tool, even though it may be challenging to know, I have to identify existing metrics for the environment and say, when I build this, not only will I not harm the planet, here is how this will enhance the planet. Same exact thing with human well-being. How do I know that this toy for children is not only going to not harm their well-being, it will improve their what's called long-term flourishing. It's not just mood, it's mental health, physiological long-term health, which includes things like Dr. Santosh was saying, being very social, being relational. Americans, people in Japan, some of the highest levels of suicide for guys my age, men my age, the second leading cause of death in America and Japan is suicide. So this is a long answer. I just want to say that all of these tools, if we were asking, and by the way, profit is still very important, but what is profit about? Is profit first? Here's the economics of anything. Most policy conversations I'm in start with, well, let's start with the economics. And by that, I mean fiscal answers of how do we have exponential growth? Exponential fiscal growth in isolation means empirically people and the planet are deprioritized. And the way things are going, they will not survive. So people, planet, and profit in unison means as we make money, we're doing it to keep this beautiful planet flourishing and have sustainable business for 50, 60, 80 years, not just 20 years until the water boils and we can't breathe. And secondly, the next 30, 40, 50, this next 6 generations, we can think about our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren thriving, living in a flourishing way in their lives. Because we're seeing with this amazing technology we're building now, we are seeing at the design phase, how do we have responsible AI that does all these things, transparency, etc. But how do we know that when it comes out into the world, we're at least going to measure against, is it improving human well-being and the planet? And by the way, if not, if you can't prove at the beginning of design that you can improve people and the planet as well as profit, then guess what? Maybe don't build it.
That's great. I think this gives us a very good chance to talk about the whole aspect of regulating all of this, and be it by a government or be it by the companies themselves. What I'm getting here is that there's a lot of complexity, but on the other hand, sometimes, I mean, I personally, sometimes there is a paradox that is difficult to get around. Like, why can a restaurant say we reserve the rights to admission, but why is it a problem when an app says you either accept my privacy policy or you don't use it, right? So there is a complexity. So I just want to go around the room before we run out of time, and I want to go around the room and talk to all of you about how you guys think this needs to be regulated, whether it's from the government or by the platforms. How does it happen? What do companies need to think of? Frank, let's start with you.
Self-regulation, I don't think is going to work. We've tried that in India across various sectors, Prasid, and you and me both know that, especially in our sector too, it has not worked. So where there is so much money involved, I don't think that these MNCs and these big tech companies are going to actually do something about it, because they are in it to make their money. The regulation has to be taken forward by the governments. That's the only way, because there's some level of trust involved when you look at the government, because at least you believe that the government is working in the interest of the people and in the interest of the country. So the regulation will have to come from there and nowhere else. But then again, here's another problem. How much of regulation is good and how much is over regulating? This is something that we need to get into as well, because then issues like freedom of press, freedom of expression, and all of these other aspects come to the fore. So when you look at this issue as a whole, I believe that the government is in the best position to regulate, but also it has to be done very tactfully, and it also has to be done in a manner in which the rights of the people are not are not affected. This is how I'd like to conclude by saying that government is in the best position really to deal with this particular issue. And I'm going to take your leave, gentlemen, because I have to be elsewhere right now. Thank you. A real pleasure being here, and it was really nice speaking to you all and participating in this panel discussion. Thank you to the organizers for having me here as well, and Prasid, a fantastic job.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks for joining us. I'll quickly move to Dr. Chaturvedi here. I also, when it comes to regulation, I also want to bring in one aspect that, for the longest time when we have done regulation, these sectors have not involved as much data as we have today. And we haven't had problems like, okay, listen, you can say Facebook needs to do XYZ, but we just don't have the algorithms to do something like this. So sometimes I think it feels like, when it comes to regulation and all, data trumps human instinct, right? And so how do you look at regulating these platforms, given, what I just said? If you could bring all of that in.
Well, regulation is, something like an emergency. So, as Frank mentioned, you don't know where to draw a line, and whether there is a line or there is a range. Where do we do that? So, regulation is something, a trait which people do not like. People do not like to be regulated. It's the same way, as John said, to be manipulated. So, it's at the other end of the same dimension. But John, I have one comment about what you said. There are people who want to be manipulated. There are people who want somebody else to take their decision. I look up, let's say, in a restaurant, and I find so many things. I find it very difficult to choose. Or in a grocery app, there are 10 types of teas. I want somebody to tell me that, take this tea, and every time I take that tea. So regulation is not going to be very helpful. People oppose regulations. And that is what is going to bring about a lot of conflict. I see one question on the screen about moderation on social media. I think the moderation is, again, should be decided by self. What is harmful for one, what is not harmful for another, the same person. There are two criteria. One is about satisfaction, how satisfied one feels with the social media or about the amount of activities which are on that. And second is about consent. Consent is the most important thing, and I think that is what John mentioned and Frank mentioned. When people take our consent for granted, that is something which we don't like, and that is another type of regulation. Yeah, thanks.
Good. Mr. Havens, if you could jump in here.
I think these are all excellent points. I think what we're focused on regulation about is more the tools and the policies that let people have their own decisions. So I'll give you the example of consent is really important. Meaningful consent is really hard because meaningful consent also has to have disclosure, but not a 50-page terms and conditions. So for instance, Doctor, what you were saying, if you're in a restaurant and there's all these things to choose from, the technology itself is fantastic. And by the way, I love AI. That's why I'm here. I'm a geek, right? In the best way. And so if you went into that restaurant and already you had an app or whatever that knew your preferences, and maybe there's certain types of teas you just don't ever drink. Maybe you're allergic to a certain number, right? So the restaurant may offer 50 of them, but you would probably only ever drink 20. And maybe you're like, I'd like maybe to sometimes be reminded of these 10, but you're not going to ever have the other 10 because of your allergies. All those things I just said, every one of them, how much more effective and expedient would it be if you, as the person who had those preferences on the front end of that app, entered in those preferences, right? But then you had a special disclosure that said, keep in mind, we are going to be using this data to do X, Y, and Z. That's the 50 pages. But you can also have a tool where those preferences, you enter in those first into sort of a universal kind of app about your own values. And then when you go into that restaurant, because without that app right now, what's happening is you go into that restaurant and maybe they say, hey, we have an app that does these things. And you get the benefit of the service, but you're not aware of the full cost. The full cost is your data is being used for all these things you don't know about. And then maybe your allergies and your preferences about tea are then construed in different ways that manipulate you down the road. Oh, he's allergic to X. At this time of day, he likes to get tea. That's probably in the afternoon when most humans have this lag of reason. And that's the best time to get them to do something they don't want to do. Now, the whole thing about manipulation versus what's usually called nudging is disclosure. Nudging is, I'm friends with any of you, and I'm like, hey, doctor, you mentioned you like this tea. And you also said in the afternoon you get kind of irritable, but if you drink a certain Darjeeling tea, you feel better. So if we're friends, I might text you and be like, time for the Darjeeling, right? That's a friend nudging you in an established, trusting relationship. Brands can have that relationship, but they can't have it until we have this whole new paradigm of data agency where I'm reaching out as a brand saying, hey, doctor, can I access your data through these trusted channels? And then when you use that app, your terms and conditions through an algorithmic, we actually have a standard asking for people to create their own algorithmic level terms and conditions that really reflects your values and follows you everywhere. What it also does is gives you just a warning system, cybersecurity and otherwise. You walk into one restaurant, maybe they're really savvy, smart people with data and they protect your data well. You walk into another restaurant, they probably, this is what happens all the time, bought like the cheapest thing they could because they want to bring in customers, not realizing it's cheap for them to buy because it absolutely harvests data in ways that are absolutely malignant. For instance, how children's data is accessed. I'm speaking for myself, but also for a lot of the work we do at IEEE. We are allowed as humans to draw a line. We are allowed to say children under the age of 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, should not have their data harvested in the same way that humans do. There's a woman named Baroness Beeben Kidron out of the UK who's created foundational regulation along these lines. And to your point, people don't like regulation, but I also like what you said. They actually do. Just don't call it regulation. I'm a parent. I love my kids. Certain things I say they don't love, but they also know that they're protected because I'm watching out for them. More importantly, when I come to a point as a parent where I have to give them a choice, and I know they're going to make a choice and I hope they don't make mistakes, we've established trust and communication channels and things that they can do where they know all these things already. It's not, hey, guess what? I've already done these things. I've taken your data. I've sold these things. I have manipulated you. Because the last thing I'll say here is it is always manipulation if it's opaque. Even if the result is doctor or me are like, hey, cool, I got a good tea. I mean, great. I'm glad you got good tea. I'm glad I got the book I wanted on Amazon. Nonetheless, it is still manipulation in the sense of, I don't know how that process happened to get me to that book, where I'm given information in full disclosure and meaningful consent. Then I can say, it's okay that I don't know how the algorithm worked, but I feel safe in the process because I have access and control of the data. Otherwise, I bring this up because the next time something happens and Frank's gone, right, he doesn't understand why he got the information he did. That means it's a lack of clarity, which always leads to distrust, even if the company didn't do anything wrong. So that's why we're really fighting for clarity with the work we're doing in IEEE. And again, always an invitation to join this work. We need so many more voices from India. Be honored to have more voices from India, because the last thing I'd want to assume is any cultural, regional, or certainly global, regulatory aspects of India. But I hope that makes sense. The manipulation is not up to us as individuals because companies want us to buy stuff. That's manipulation. That's not wrong. What needs to be addressed is how these amazing technologies can be given to people where people already have data access and data sovereignty channels in place. Then the real trust relationship can begin.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Havens. Dr. Pravesh?
Yes?
Please join in on this. What is your thoughts on how we regulate these platforms?
So related to nudging and manipulation, I have done some research in the context of news. So nudging is, let's say I understand it as that I have read 10 different articles, and based on that, you try to guess which next article I would like to read, and you recommend based on my profile or my social network, right? Manipulation happens when you show me something without disclosing how that recommendation was generated, and that has been a big problem in social media. For example, there could be a group of users who want to promote a particular article, so they can create a fake profile, or they can use bots to push the popularity of a particular article, and then that pops up as a popular article or the article you like in your screen. So that is a manipulation, because you are treating it as a genuine feedback or genuine response, and on the other hand, the system was manipulated by a group of users for their benefit, right? So coming back to my position is what John has said, that users should be aware of that how the recommendations that are being generated to them, they were shortlisted, or if any way their data is being used, that should be disclosed to them, and they should make informed decision. And wherever there is a lack of information, or there is a lack of there is something fishy going on that user doesn't know, that is a part of manipulation, and that we should try to minimize to the extent possible.
Got it. I ask these questions all the time, be it through my articles or on my podcast or whatever. So I'm going to quickly take some questions from the audience here. And I can see one from Anjali Wanga. It's for Mr. Havens. It's directed directly at you. She's asking, are governments really at the best position to be deciding on these regulations, knowing that they themselves may have vested interests and might, create regulations accordingly?
It's a great question. And, knowing that I'm from the States and most, I think, other folks here are from India, first, I'll just say it's impossible to sort of say one thing for every government and all that. I think, we all have vested interests. I think my sense is what you mean is, would the government maybe try to keep people's voices from being heard, et cetera? And again, that's really challenging. Are we talking about India, which I would defer to all of you? Are we talking about China, the US? But I think in general, it's critical. The reason I brought up the metrics of success is to think about incentives, right? What are the incentives and for governments or businesses to do anything? And then what is it that society defines as success? If society defines success with competition, and this is a lot of the ethics stuff, and I'll try to keep my answer short, but competition means we as humans are not entering into conversations in a how do we improve long-term sustainability and human flourishing manner. We're really saying we are thinking about ourselves first. Now, I don't mean to say that India shouldn't prioritize India and the United States shouldn't prioritize. I mean, you want to take care of the people who are around you, of course. But it won't work if the mentality is competing, right? Where sometimes there's overt competing, US versus China, which I find doesn't help anything. I get it, and I'm speaking for myself, by the way, not my organization here. What a wonderful opportunity to say, what we all have in common as humans, as a rule, as parents, we all love our kids. Pretty common. We want our kids to thrive and flourish. So we're governments and businesses and individuals, right? I have to be careful because I don't want to make it say like, yay, I love the environment, but I can look out in my driveway. I have 2 cars that use gas, right? So a systems mentality is critical. It's so complex, but what makes things a lot easier, not easier to execute, but easier to change the paradigm of even how you've asked your question is, are governments in the best decision to be deciding in the current status quo? My answer is no. They aren't, largely because they won't be effective. Governments won't be effective if business or Silicon Valley says, here's what we're going to do with data, because that's what they've done for the past 10 years. And I'm not trying to demonize them. I'm saying even above them is this logic of what does society deem as success? If as society, governments, business, and individuals, we are content to say, I think all of society, India, US, Africa, indigenous people, women, and by the way, to give a shout out on the next panel, I'd love to have more women involved, by the way, I say that respectfully, meaning on this panel. Just because I always benefit from the diversity of those views. So again, respectfully. Anyway, to say is really what we measure as success for society right now still comes back to that one number, GDP. And so governments aren't going to be effective in one sense there, because regulation is still going to be sort of fighting against this thing of businesses potentially saying, well, our shareholders legally, right? This is critical. Shareholder law says our businesses can say whatever they want, but they are legally beholden to maximize exponential profits. That changes everything. That's an empirical, what's called a key performance indicator in business, where every quarter, any of these conversations we're having, they become somewhat immaterial if what the actual actions that businesses have to take go back to, I got to focus on that single bottom line and always be increasing in an exponential way. And I say exponential, it's critical. There's something wrong with profit, making money, sustaining a business, honoring the shareholders who created the business, of course. But empirically, if the number one thing that we're focusing on ideologically is exponential growth, then every decision will be made on how do we keep doing that. And that means that someone's going to say, hey, if we do this, right, we're not going to be able to honor our supply chain in terms of the environment because we have to kind of cut corners, or we won't make those fiscal numbers. Then that means ideologically, legally, shareholder-wise, there are no decisions to make. The question you just asked, as good a question as it is immaterial if legally the business says, I don't care about the governments, we got to do this. And someone's like, it's going to hurt water and the supply chain, and it's not going to get water to people in India or people in Minnesota. Their answer is still, they're under the constraints of, I don't want to do that. I got to do this. So we're working to, in our work, to reframe the question and say, simply, right now it's just imagining, because where shareholder law exists, it's not going to change until the laws change, or things like the B Corp movement kicks in and the legal structure of companies change, or taxes change, or ESG reporting mandates how companies report things like sustainability. So they shift to focus at the beginning of design. But even just to picture a world, right, where businesses could say, oh, you take a deep breath and say, wait a second. And what if next quarter we don't have to maximize shareholder profits in an exponential way? And we can say, what would the planet look like if we prioritize that? What would it look like if mental health of our customers and all of our stakeholders was to increase? What people will say is that's really hard, totally fair. What Dr. Santosh knows is there are not necessarily uniform global metrics for mental health, but there are a lot of them out there, and you can begin measuring it. But then the answer back to, our government's the best at deciding. What a wonderful opportunity for governments, business, and individuals together to say, what about a people, planet, and profit in unison mindset moving forward, where competition is not the ideology, but it is only through collaboration with a systems mindset that literally the world and people even survive.
I think also the concept of vested interest in governments and all, it also comes from the fact that we expect open internet, so to speak, while what we're doing today is the splinternet, right? We have nation state borders around the internet. So you got it absolutely spot on. Dr. Santosh, there's a question for you from Mayank Malik, and I know you have thoughts on this. Do social media apps need to redesign themselves to remove the pattern of stimulus and response that they represent to their users, which leads to addiction and a series of dopamine hits?
Well, it's going to be very difficult to do that, because most actions would lead to some response or reaction. So, to think that a stimulus would not generate a response, it's not going to work. And like I said, I think even if there are responses, they are again going to fall under the bell-shaped curve. There would be responses in a large two-thirds of the proportion of people, where they would be taken in a very healthy way, and there are some where it will have negative effect. And so like it's very difficult to remove dopamine surging or any happiness giving element out of an activity. It's going to be very difficult. That will become an antithesis to the whole process itself, because if we cut that, then people might not even able to use it. So the way to deal with it would be different. To prevent addiction to social media or addiction to internet and visual world and all that, is to again to self-regulate, to see that if you cannot live without it, you are having a problem. If you can't cut the use of it, if you cannot control it and it is controlling you, look at it as an early sign. And if there is a salience all the time you're thinking about it, that is another sign that something is wrong and you need to stop it and take help. So that would be the way to go about, even for any aspect of health, to see that when is it the early phases of harm, and nip it in the bud.
Great. I think we've run. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I apologize. I just wanted to say I do have to I didn't know how long we were going, so that was my error. But I wanted to say I have to jump off. It's been such an honor to talk with all of you. I want to give a shout out. You have amazing questions in your chat room, and if it's okay, my the URL ethicsinAction.IEEE.org is my work. I would love to have anyone join our work. It's all open. I'm on Twitter, like I said, at John, JOHNCHAVENS. So I didn't get to answer some questions, but Prasid, if it's appropriate, I'm happy to send thoughts back to you via email. And again, I'm sorry to jump off early, but just want to say such a pleasure to speak to you all, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, John. No, I was just getting at that. We have also run well past our time on this. So thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us. Discussions on social media can, should, and will continue forever. So it's not surprising that we have run past our time. I'll hand it back to Srividya and Azim. I think we should end the panel here. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us. Thanks a lot to the
Thank you,
panelists.
everybody.
That was an insightful discussion on social media and its multivariate implication on our society. Irrespective of how one approaches the topic, the fact that social media is a powerful tool can never be ignored. The only aspect based on which it differs from the proverbial knife, which can kill or be used to save life, is its power to manipulate its users. While it is being used across fields like businesses, healthcare, and crisis management, it is also simultaneously being used to push propagandas, shame people, impose opinions, and incite riots. The onus of making social media a safe platform lies on us, its users, and the big techs, its creators.
The internet is perhaps a chaotic place. If we aren't very careful, it will consume us and may perhaps rob us of our happiness and sanity. It can make us angry, jealous, hostile, bitter, or even happy and lead to the eventual loss of enthusiasm for living our best lives. So perhaps one can understand from this discussion that we have to be wary and avoid overconsumption of social media. And we'd like to once again thank all our esteemed panelists, Mr. Prasid Banerjee, Dr. Santosh Kumar Chaturvedi, Mr. John Havens, Mr. Frank Roshan Pereira, and Dr. Shankar Pravesh for gracing this occasion today with their presence. We'd also like to thank our title sponsor OFT, our co-sponsor Times Now, and Autodesk for powering this edition of Pragyan. We also like to thank all the other sponsors and patrons for their continuous and invaluable support. And this brings us to the end of Crossfire 21. We hope that the perspectives gained from this panel discussion have left us all less opinionated and more informed. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For more than a decade, India's most influential news channel has built its unimpeachable reputation by keeping an unflagging vigil on every now moment of our times. 24 hours a day, Times Now serves as a perfect foil for India's diversity. A kaleidoscope of images and a cornucopia of views. As the day dawns, so does the common man on his favorite platform, Times Now. Times Now's vow to fight for the rights of the common man has led us to devise change-inducing campaigns, never failing to fight fear in the face of adversity with the power of the fact. To ensure our viewers were fully aware of the gravity of the once-in-a-century pandemic, Times Now unfurled the one-of-its-kind India Outbreak Report. When the COVID ghost of gloom haunted India, your channel, Times Now, shed light on the road to revival. Like the ever-blazing, life-giving sun, without fail, without exception, you will find Times Now's intrepid teams first on the horizon of the big national news story. While others resort to malpractice and drive a personal agenda, Times Now has never compromised on its credibility. Unwaveringly, unafraid, unflinchingly, honest, always. Just like India's democracy that empowers the last citizen, your channel has pledged to give voice to the most marginalized. Times Now's aggressive reporting style has made it the relentless force it is today. Because your channel's only motivation is the people's conviction. Unblemished, uncompromised, unrelenting, unbiased, unintimidatable, unsurpassed. We are Times Now.